Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to today's episode on how to help you sleep better. A reminder that our podcast is not medical advice. Our intention for today is to highlight the importance of sleep and to bring about an increased awareness of it as potentially a source of stress. You'll discover that sleep quality and quantity is along a continuum, and that this continuum is dynamic. And approaching how we view and experience sleep with mindfulness and self-compassion can help decrease sleep-associated stress. Takeaways include normalizing that most humans at one point or another in their lives have had some issues with sleep, whether it be not enough sleep, not enough quality sleep, or too much sleep. And through mindfulness, coaching, and integrative approaches, as well as shifts in sleep mindset, quality and even duration may improve.
So this podcast was inspired by one of my physician clients who wanted coaching on what you just described as sleep-associated stress and a long-standing issue with sleep for her. But not only did she struggle with the sleep itself, she struggled with the idea of struggling with sleep itself. And there was those layers upon layers of judgment. And she reported essentially that her life was dictated by her worries about not sleeping enough. And this has come up a number of times. And actually, since that one session, I've had several other physicians bring up sleep. I did not bring it up. And so it's very interesting how our culture has all kinds of stories about sleep and stories filled with judgment. And as we were talking just before recording this, it reminded me that as a pediatrician, sleep is one of the utmost things we talk about. And parents judge themselves about how well their children sleep. And everyone has judgmental thoughts about sleep training. And then I'm thinking about residency, right? And it's all about sleep and how much sleep you did get or didn't get and judgments around that. And we talk so much about how sleep is important to performance. And yet when we're struggling with sleep, that can actually work against us. And so as we launch into our conversation here, I wanted to offer some questions just to think about. Do you judge yourself for your ability to sleep, to fall asleep, to stay asleep, and how much you sleep? Do you have compassion for yourself when you don't sleep? And if you need to take something to sleep, do you judge that? The other thing that comes to mind also is that many times in my years of physician wellness, the shift workers all wanted to have wellness sessions focused on sleep. And I think that when we have unusual schedules and or a baby, as I mentioned up above, the way that we focus our mind about sleep becomes very stressful. And so when we have to sleep on a different schedule, or we have to wake up according to someone else's sleep, a lot of this judgmental stories and thoughts, and even words about sleep become stressful. The other point in time where sleep is really an issue is perimenopausal sleep. And I think many of us judge ourselves as having poor sleep then. We use words that have a negative connotation. And so while sleep is 100% important, I want to share in this podcast that there are many things that we can do to improve our sleep just in the sleep mindset world.
And I'm also bringing in some of my integrative expertise as well as my pulmonary expertise here. And I'm going to put in an explicit disclaimer here that if you experience trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or getting good quality sleep in general, it's always a good idea to ask for some help. So checking in with your primary care physician to see if there's something organic that might be causing this, maybe some thyroid issue, or as you had mentioned, Jessie, a perimenopause or postmenopausal state. And sometimes you might even need a referral to a sleep specialist because, in general, sleep disordered breathing, such as sleep apnea, are woefully underdiagnosed. So, obtaining objective data about your sleep architecture, what that looks like, could be really helpful to improve your sleep and help you heal. So, I wanted to just share some sometimes maybe common knowledge, but uh, I think it's warranted to repeat and remind everyone some of these tips. So, if you're caffeine sensitive, like I happen to be very caffeine sensitive, I don't really drink caffeinated coffee in the morning. If you're caffeine sensitive, then avoid caffeine after noon. And this is assuming, of course, that you're planning and setting the intention to sleep at night. Also, a pre sleep ritual can be really helpful. So, humans love rituals. It's comforting and soothing, all for the mind, body, and spirit. And this pre sleep ritual can give you an opportunity to change your environment to simulate the natural onset of melatonin secretion from your brain itself. So, for instance, dimming the lights and avoiding electronic screens, which emit that blue light, which suppresses melatonin. So, avoiding those screens for a few hours before bedtime, not exercising too close to bedtime, and doing whatever you find to be nourishing, comforting, relaxing, and that may or may not involve a shower or a bath, maybe even reading an enjoyable, neutral book. The other tip is to prioritize the bedroom wherever you sleep for rest and intimacy. Keeping your room as dark as possible, like wearing some eye masks, can also be helpful because we know that keeping the room as dark as possible will help stimulate the secretion of melatonin. And then for me, I'm also quite a light sleeper, so I actually do use earplugs. Also, a cooler room, so temperature wise, that can be more conducive to sleep. And then I wanted to then launch into some of the integrative approaches to sleep as well. And another reminder to check in with your physician in considering any of these, and that this is not medical advice, but taken from my own integrative medicine fellowship curriculum and what I myself have sometimes utilized and what has helped me too. So, some of the herbal approaches include valerian, ashwagandha, chamomile, kava, passion flower, and some supplements could include magnesium, melatonin, and L-theanine. Aromatherapy with lavender can actually be quite pleasant and also relaxing and might induce sleep as well. Mind body approaches are the mainstay of what I recommend for my patients. The gold standard treatment of insomnia is cognitive behavioral therapy directed for insomnia, and then mindfulness as well. So many people that I've worked with in the last decade or so have used the body scan as one method of helping them fall back asleep because body scan side effects include drowsiness. So you can take advantage of that and do a body scan if you happen to awaken in the middle of the night. The 4-7-8 breath, so inhaling for 4 counts, holding your breath for 7, and exhaling for 8 counts, and doing that breath cycle 3 to 5 times sometimes can be helpful, especially when winding down for bed. And then Tai Chi, Qigong, and yoga, especially restorative yoga, slower forms of yoga, can help improve sleep quality. And then there's also some compelling literature about exercise and the time of day in which you exercise. So, morning exercise can also help you to reduce wake time after sleep onset. And specifically, aerobic exercise can help you increase the duration of REM sleep, which is considered the most restorative type of sleep for us as humans. Lots of different tips in there for you to explore and get curious about. Another reminder to sleep to speak with your healthcare professionals if you want to take any supplements, herbal or otherwise.
I wanted to reflect on the fact that I asked you the question when I first looked at what we were going to talk about, whether white noise was included as an integrative approach to sleep. And you reflected that it wasn't in your training, and yet it does look like there's evidence for it. And one of the reasons I bring it up is, of course, as a pediatrician, many parents love the idea of white sleep for children. And my guess is that it originally came from the idea of drowning out the other sounds. And so that people couldn't hear, if you lived in an apartment on a busy street, you wouldn't hear the buses and your child would wake up less easily. But I know many, many people who use it almost as a ritual. The kids hear the noise and they begin to fall asleep. It's just based on our quick research, it looks like there is some evidence for adults too. But I found it interesting that it isn't necessarily included as an integrative approach to sleep. And yet it's one of the things that I hear, aside from melatonin, as one of the most effective ways that people find is helpful to sleep. I wanted to reflect on a couple of other things. So you mentioned just like cool room being helpful for sleep. And that makes me think about the perimenopause, menopause situation and the hot flashes and the different temperatures. And so that, in just thinking about it practically, it may be a temperature shift that makes you wake up. So as I was going through perimenopause, I had a lot of judgment about sleep. And that's really what I want to shift to talking about next. But when I was able to switch to it's a temperature issue, or it's a cortisol issue, and knowing that, cortisol spikes in the middle of the night often make us wake up, I was much less judgmental about my waking up and my ability to go back to sleep. And so that sort of pivots us into this idea of the stories we tell about sleep and the stories we tell about ourselves. Like, do we have a sleep problem or is sleep a growth area? So there are a lot of different ways to think about it. I also hear so many people say they have trouble falling asleep, and they always use the word trouble or a problem. And to me, it's a transition to sleep. And a lot of us struggle with transitions. And we are fully accepting that children need rituals to fall asleep. Nobody has an issue with giving your child a bath before they go to bed. And yet we think somehow we're less than if we need help with that transition. And so my thought is transition well and figure out what you need to do that. Set yourself up for success. And so the rituals and habits that you mentioned can be really helpful. You also said something that really caught my ear here, which was if your intention is to sleep well. And it strikes me that most of us don't think proactively as setting an intention to sleep well, and setting an intention, setting ourselves up well for good sleep, even starting when we wake up. Those people that do it tend to do it from a place of, I'm terrible at sleep, I have a problem, and I have to make sure I can sleep, bringing that sort of stressed energy. But what if it was just part of our sort of life overall health and wellness plan, that we set ourselves up for healthy sleep? And one of the sort of coaching tenets that I think would be really helpful here is thinking about the feelings that you want to have around sleep, right? Because if we have stress feelings, or we have judgmental feelings, or we have negative feelings, or we think we have a problem, we come into it feeling less than, we won't sleep well. And so what if you wanted to have a peaceful relationship with sleep, or even just a neutral relationship with sleep if you have a bad relationship with sleep? I think that, and setting that intention and thinking, how can I set myself up for good sleep in the future, is not from the place of scarcity, not from a place of I'm not adequate, but just from a place of these are things that help you have, night and day, light and dark, sleep and awake, and thinking about it just in a much more neutral fashion, I think can make a really big difference. So one thought that I want to inspire you all to notice is the stories that you have about sleep. And this person that I was coaching spoke about this common phrase that if I don't sleep enough, X will happen. Tomorrow will be bad. I'll make mistakes. I'm super stressed. And so these were kind of default thoughts in her brain. And while, yes, we don't feel good when we're tired, it's not always terrible. Sometimes the day turns out fine. And I think when we think about these sort of, if I don't, this will happen, and it's again, sleep associated stress, our ability to sleep is very much hindered by that. And so what I would suggest is thinking about the stories that you have about sleep, thinking about what you talk about your own sleeping. Are you a good sleeper? Are you a bad sleeper? Do you struggle with sleep? Is your life dictated by sleep? And thinking back for those of you who happen to have children about all the stories and all the conversation about sleep when they were young and how that impacted your life. And so deciding, I love this idea of deciding what relationship you want to have with sleep. And so many of you have heard me say what you practice grows. And so bad sleeping begets bad sleeping. Stressful stories about sleep beget stressful stories about sleep and not as good sleep. And some of us even have shame about sleep. And as you all know, when I talk about shame, blame, and guilt, that's releasing norepinephrine and cortisol, which are definitely not going to help you sleep. And so that's where being strategic about sleep and bringing in mindfulness and telling good stories about sleep and noticing, simply noticing the stories that you tell about sleep. And so an invitation to tell better stories. And ones that I think can be helpful are, sleep is a growth area for me. This is so what I told myself during perimenopause is this is temporary. It's a temporary shift. I'm going through a transition. It's not forever. And that took the pressure off, and I was almost always able to sleep better. And maybe not labeling it as a problem, but as a situation or something you're learning or something you're practicing, I think can be very helpful. Staying out of blame, shame, and guilt and sticking to it's a hormonal problem or it's a cortisol release problem can be really helpful. The other thing that I just want to reflect on for physicians is that I think we actually have often PTSD around sleep coming from our residency experience. And so the lack of sleep, the scarcity of sleep, or perhaps just a lot of strong feelings about how much sleep we get, what a good sleeper we are, how quickly we fall asleep, and to just have compassion for those. I think when we get stressed about our relationship to sleep and not enough sleep, it's we can exhaust ourselves further. And so if you feel like you have PTSD around it, acknowledging it, potentially getting support for it, and really showing up with self-compassion that I think, of course, many physicians have to keep it neutral, unusual relationships with sleep, or to keep it not neutral, stressful relationships with sleep. And so can you be intentional in showing up more intentionally and more mindfully around sleep? And so my invitation, as I mentioned before, is what you practice grows, and perhaps set an intention and practice approaching sleep in that way and see how your sleep might shift.
Inevitably in our life, we will have times where there will be a restless night of tossing and turning. So I wanted to offer this ritual as an alternative to the tossing and turning as taught to me by my prior professors when I was going through pulmonary and critical care fellowship. So again, this is not medical advice, but it is something that you might be invited to try if you feel like it might be helpful. So instead of our habit of potentially clock watching or looking at the time every time that we get up in the middle of the night, I invite you to turn around your digital clocks or any clock at all so that you have already set your alarm for what time you're going to be waking up, and you don't necessarily need to know what time it is in the middle of the night, because that can actually be another source of stress is, oh gosh, I only have X number of hours before I have to get up.
And notice
Or,
the I only have, right?
yeah,
That's the story, the only.
yep.
Very
Or
expensive.
gosh, I've been in bed for however many hours and I still haven't quote unquote fallen asleep yet. So inviting you just take that out of the equation, and you don't need that source of stress. Um, so inviting you to turn the clocks around. Also, it's another source of light. So to maintain the melatonin optimization strategy here. So if after about 20 minutes, ironically, I'm asking you to turn the clocks around and judge what 20 minutes is, but approximately 20 minutes. If you're not asleep, give yourself permission to get up. And you can feel free to read a neutral book. So, not like a New York Times best-selling book that's a page turner, but like a neutral book. Some of my patients have read like dictionaries or Reader's Digest or um, something that's pretty neutral for you. And then if you feel sleepy again, or like if you feel the onset of tiredness, then you can go back to bed and try again. And all of this is happening non-judgmentally, which is really hard to do, especially when we attach so much meaning to sleep quality and sleep quantity that somehow it's predictive of our future. So the invitation here is that a night of tossing and turning becomes an opportunity to practice some mindfulness.
And I would also offer, when you wake up, I think so many of us have the habit of picking up our phones and scrolling and listening to things, etc. And so I know from the recommendations that we give for parents and teens, right? Leave your phone in the other room on a charger, and that might serve many of us well if you can. That being said, I would also say that there are many sleep apps that can help you fall asleep, not sleep apps per se, but many people use the Calm sleep stories to help children fall asleep. And if you have children and you're putting your children to sleep and you have issues falling asleep, I fully embrace adults using children's stories to fall asleep. And so use the Calm app together. Then that's a beautiful way to develop some different sort of sleep hygiene habits. And there are many sessions to help you fall asleep on Calm, Headspace, all of them. And many people who I interact with say they never heard the end of it because they're always asleep. And so finding the thing that works for you, but again, making sure that you're doing it in a way that is not waking you up with the light and with being on your phone. And if you do wake up in the middle of the night, there's that urge there to pick it up. And just realizing that, as although it might seem comforting, it's an urge and it probably will keep you up longer. And I wanted to reflect also, I mentioned a couple of podcasts ago about restorative yoga, and restorative yoga is actually designed to be a before bed practice for the most part. You can do it during the day too, but it does help you shift. It helps you transition into that sleep mode. It's activating your parasympathetic nervous system. A lot of restorative yoga, there's different brain waves in restorative yoga than in sleep, but it can prep you to help you get ready for bed. And if you don't have time to do a whole class, for example, you can establish your own restorative yoga routine, feet up the wall, maybe child's pose. You can do it with dimmed lights. You can do restorative is the one that we spoke about where you're in the same pose for 5 or 10 minutes. And so you can do one pose, and that can help many people fall asleep. And many people will use eye bags and pillows and blankets and all of the things so that you're really sort of rolling from restorative yoga into bed. The other thing that I wanted to mention is there's a fair bit of science around gratitude and sleep. And that gratitude is something that there's a lot of evidence that practicing gratitude before bed helps you sleep. And so if you're going to practice it before bed on the off chance, and apparently it's not just a chance, that it helps you sleep.
So, as always, we like to close our episodes with some reflection questions for you, dear listener. What's your current relationship with sleep like?
Is your life dictated by worries about not sleeping enough or not sleeping well?
What have been some not so helpful thoughts related to sleep? And are there more helpful thoughts that you might be open to thinking instead?
And is there a practical tip that you might like to explore to see if it helps you navigate sleep more effectively?
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode to be helpful, please leave us some stars and reviews, and please share widely so that we might be able to have the opportunity to help others.
If you're in healthcare, join us in the Mindful Healthcare Collective. We talk about a lot of different practices of mindfulness, and there's a fair bit of conversation about integrative approaches to health and living that you may find helpful. I also would encourage you to join me for an in-person retreat and learn how to practice restorative yoga. It's one of the best tools that I have personally found around sleep. And if you struggle with sleep, really focus on your stories. And if you need help identifying your stories and you need help creating new stories about sleep, reach out. Something that I find actually really fun to be strategic about some of these very concrete frustrations and I will say challenges in quotes in our life that oftentimes we think coaching is for a whole relationship or a marriage, but it can help with small things, which actually are the big things like sleep. Stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for our mindful moment, and we'll see you next week.
As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely. Welcome to this body scan practice. For this mindful moment, I hope that you'll consider using this as a tool for you to use when you are having some difficulty falling asleep, or if you need some moments of quiet to recenter, to ground back into yourself. Inviting you to close eyes and rest in a position of comfort. You could be laying down or sitting. And there's always the option to not close eyes. You can simply lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. Begin by noticing the sensations of the contact points between your body and the surrounding environment. So it could be a chair, a bed, a couch, the ground, a cushion. Noticing the pressure of the support beneath you. Noticing all the contact points between you and the environment from head to toe. And as you're ready, bringing your awareness to your feet. Noticing what's present for you at the feet. Noticing the sensations or lack of sensations, whatever your direct experience is right here, right now. Bringing the awareness to the feet. And as you're ready, bringing your awareness to your lower legs, encompassing the area just below the knees all the way to your ankles. And as thoughts, feelings, body sensations perhaps capture your attention, you can choose to bring your attention back to the lower legs. And as you're ready, inviting you to shift the attention to the upper legs, from the knees to the hips, encompassing the thighs. Simply noticing what's there for you now. Knowing that if there's a lack of sensation, that is all right as well, because it is part of your experience. Next, as you're ready, shifting attention to the pelvis, acknowledging the buttocks, the genitalia, all of the different organs that reside in the pelvis. And next, as you're ready, noticing the back. Perhaps the back is laying or leaning against a surface, noticing the points of contact there. And if there's any areas of discomfort, you can choose to stay with that discomfort. Just for a moment. And perhaps choosing to bring the breath to that area of discomfort. Seeing if you can invite some release, softening, letting go in that area. And as you're ready, inviting you to notice the front aspect of your torso. So this includes your chest, your abdomen, noticing chest and abdomen rising and falling with every breath, the sensations of the rib cage expanding and contracting with every breath. Perhaps noticing the heartbeat, perhaps noticing some sounds or sensations of the abdomen if you had recently eaten. Noticing what your direct experience of noticing this front part of your torso is like right now. And as you're ready, shifting your attention to your hands, noticing each finger, the spaces between the fingers, the palms, the back of the hands. Shifting now to your arms, these connectors between your hands and the rest of your body. Noticing what's present for you here. And next, as you're ready, noticing the shoulders and the neck. An area where there may be tension or discomfort. Inviting some choice as to how to encounter what you notice. Allowing it to be there, even just for a moment. And you choosing to invite the breath, some nourishing breath to that area to allow for some softening or release. And as you're ready, noticing the entire head, the structure that houses the mind and so many of our senses. Noticing if there's any tension or discomfort, perhaps at the jaw. And again, inviting breath to welcome some softening, release, letting go. And as you're ready, coming back to the breath at the nostrils, noticing the in-breath, noticing the out-breath, noticing the pause in between. Not trying to change the breath in any way, but simply noticing the sensations of breathing. Reminding you that each breath nourishes every part of your body. Sending you well wishes of peace and rest. Thank you so much for practicing with me.